For our next discussion, please welcome to the stage the De-stigmatization and Barriers to Recovery panel moderated by Glenn Sterner, Assistant Professor of Criminal Justice at the Pennsylvania State University Abington campus.
Wow.
Wonderful. What an inspiring story. Thank you so much for having us here this afternoon. We're so excited to be finishing out the day with this incredible panel that I'm sitting up here moderating. My name is Glenn Sterner. I am an assistant professor, as you heard, of criminal justice at Penn State Abington campus. And it is my distinct honor to be sitting up on the stage with such a profound group of people who are out there in our communities doing really incredible work to address the stigma attached to opioid use disorder. Today, we've heard a lot about different stories. Hopefully you've had the opportunity to go out and interact with the kiosks to hear the different stories attached to the Someone You Know, Share Your Opioid Story campaign. The work that we've been doing at Penn State University has been really incredible, but it couldn't have been most of this work is because of the incredible partnership that we have with the Independence Blue Cross Foundation. I've been working with them to collect stories of those who've been affected by the opioid crisis through the Share Your Opioid Story initiative that has led to the Someone You Know campaign and is now being taken across the entire Commonwealth thanks to the Department of Drug and Alcohol Programs with the help of Secretary Jennifer Smith and the Wolf administration. So we are excited to be able to address this key community issue attached to the opioid crisis all across the entire Commonwealth. Today, we have 4 people that I would like to introduce to you that are doing that exact work here in the Philadelphia region. First of all, I would like to introduce to you the Honorable Michael J. Barrasse, President Judge, Court of Common Pleas of Lackawanna County. Would you introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. As was mentioned, my name is Judge Barrasse. I am the presiding judge in Scranton, Pennsylvania. For 20 years, have had a treatment court. I am also the chairman of the National Association of Drug Court Professionals, representing over 3,000 courts across the United States. The fact that I'm here and that we're all here together really is a sad thing. That the truth is the heroin epidemic has brought together people that really didn't play well the sandbox together. The fact that I was a former prosecutor for many years. I was on the board of the National Association of District Attorneys. I prosecuted here in Philadelphia. I was a special assistant U.S. attorney. I was a district attorney for 3 terms in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and I've been on the bench now for my 19th year. The reality is back then, the belief was in mandatory sentences and arrest people and lock them up. The reality is that we were very much mistaken as to what the outcome would be. We thought we'd reduce crime. Instead, we realized that we created a mantra of what can we do for retribution and punishment, rather than looking at what can we do to the person, what can we do for rehabilitation. In Pennsylvania, you have a sentencing guideline that has a prior record score and an offense gravity score, which tells you how that person is going to be sentenced. What it failed to do was look at the person, look at that person's needs, look at what to be doing to reduce recidivism for the future. So I'm here today as a representative of a branch of our government that really needs to be better informed, that has to realize that as a fiduciary responsibility that we have, that we need to work greater with treatment. We also have to realize that whether it be treatment, drug and alcohol, or mental health, that we are affecting generations. And so when we're talking today about stigma, we'll get into a little bit of how it's impacted when somebody's in the criminal justice system. But our true belief is that this can be a way for the person to get out, rather than just looking at a way to get a person in the system forever. So I really believe that treatment courts and the work that's being done by thousands of courts across the United States to make a change is a direct benefit from what the medical communities have done to make changes and allow us to make changes. and we have to make sure that we're doing it right.
Thank you, Judge Bryce. Next, we have Tony Luke Jr., restaurateur, famous for Tony Luke's Cheesesteaks, but more importantly, for the hashtag Brown and White initiative to address the stigma of addiction. Tony.
I lost my son on March 27th of last year to a heroin overdose. And for a very long time, I truly didn't understand what he was going through. I had a drug problem when I was younger. Meth was my drug of choice. I did it every day. I did every drug you can think of, but I did drugs to get high. So when things got really bad and it started to affect everything in my life, I stopped because I was getting high. People with addiction are self-medicating. There's a huge difference. And unfortunately, in this country, we believe that a drug problem and addiction are the same thing. I'm telling you, they are not. Addiction is a mental health issue. Everyone, and I've spoken to hundreds of people who struggle with addiction, and the one common thread between all of them is some sort of depression, bipolar, a life situation, some type of trauma. And unfortunately, the system is set up to treat people with drug problems. Now, I'm for, and I've said this 100 times, I think that AA and NA have been unbelievable, and they have literally saved millions of people. But in 2018, the second A of anonymity needs to go away, because it is the anonymity that is keeping the stigma alive and well. When you have people struggling with addiction that are ashamed to walk into a room because they feel worthless, because that's how we make them feel. Now, I will tell you, it is the heroin that ended my son's life, but it is the stigma that killed him. Those suffering with addiction judge themselves every second of every minute of every hour of every day. They don't need you to judge them as well. And no one is a lost cause. So when I started hashtag Brown and White, which was the two primary colors of heroin, it was a social media initiative to get people to put their loved one's face on social media and let them know that this is my daughter, my father, my brother, my sister, my mom, and that they were human beings and that they were loved and they loved, and they were suffering from an addiction that was destroying them, and they should not be ashamed to say, this is my loved one, I love them, and I'm not ashamed that they suffered from a horrific disease. And until we look at addiction differently in this country, those numbers will go from 72,000 a year to 82,000 a year to 92,000 a year. And when does it end? I'm sorry. I'm not angry. I'm just frustrated. I apologize. I'm really not angry. I'm just frustrated. I'm also frustrated because my feet literally can't even touch the floor. No, that doesn't.
Thank you, Tony. Next, we have Sharmain Matlock-Turner, President and CEO of the Urban Affairs Coalition.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be a part of this conversation today. I was here from early this morning because I realized that even though I'm a member of the panel, I knew that there was a lot that I still needed to learn about this issue. I've been at the Urban Affairs Coalition now for almost 20 years. We are very close to being 50 years old in this community, and we have worked on all kinds of issues that have affected low and moderate income communities and communities of color. And too often, we have been yelling in the darkness when we looked at the crack cocaine epidemic and we started arresting mothers and putting them in jail because they were addicted to crack cocaine. I was here when the AIDS epidemic was a huge problem, but very marginalized in our society because we looked at the people who had that disease as being not worthy of having a behavior that we didn't agree with. And at the coalition, we help to create spaces for those who are fighting crack cocaine and those who are fighting the HIV and AIDS epidemic. We've also created space for those who are working on issues of homelessness and all kinds of issues where we see that people have barriers to success, whether they're coming back from prison or whether or not they're dealing with a drug and or alcohol problem. They are our brothers. They are our sisters. They are our friends. They are our neighbors. And I'm hoping that as we fight this epidemic, that we will stay together as a community to make sure that whenever we're confronted with one of these horrible epidemics, that we will all look and say, this is someone that I know, this is someone that deserves our help and deserves our support, and no matter where they live, no matter what their zip code, no matter what their color, that we are going to be there to fight it all the way with them.
Thank you, Sharmain. And finally, but certainly not least, we have Sister Mary Scullion, Executive Director of Project Home.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with everyone and to see so many people here that are committed to this really devastating disease of addiction. I'm a member of the Project Home community, and we see the devastating effects of addiction every single day when we go out on the street and work with people who are living out there. Oftentimes, people who have this disease lose so many of their supports and become isolated and marginalized to the extent that they live on the streets of Philadelphia and our communities. So at Project Home, we work to end and prevent chronic street homelessness. Over the past 30 years, we've developed about 800 units of recovery housing. We have a federally qualified health center, which is integrated health care, including MAT, medication-assisted treatment. We're a center of excellence because we believe that housing is health care, and health care can really help keep a person in housing. We have some educational centers, and we have a strong program for employment. Employment works as well. So that's what I do.
Just a few things. Thank you, Sister. To start us off, what I thought would be really important for the audience to hear are some of your perspectives on how stigma serves as a barrier to recovery. Judge, would you start us off?
I want to layer that a little bit, in that addiction's one part, but then layer in somebody that has been arrested and now has a criminal history and how that impacts their life as they move forward. Because one thing to say that someone has an addiction problem, it's another to say that they have a co-occurring problem. It's another one to say they have a co-occurring problem and they've been arrested, look how many times they've been put away, or it's a mother that's lost her child and now is caught in the criminal justice system. We talk about stigma, we're talking about choking a person's ability to really work recovery and to change their life. Because once they get into the criminal justice system, we're talking about separating the child, having the mother possibly in prison, the child now in placement. We're talking about having stigma for the next generation going down. We're also looking at saying, okay, we want you to work, we want you to go to treatment, we want you to make sure you're working your recovery, we want you to be a mother, we want you to come to your probation department meetings, and oh, by the way, give us your license. And it's one thing when you're talking about Philadelphia and you're talking about mass transit. It's very difficult for a mother to take a child and to be a mother and to take care of everything, or a father, when all of a sudden their transportation is gone, their housing is gone, the chance of employment is gone, and the stigma just continues. And when we try to look at restoring someone's ability and their hope, I think one of the biggest barriers that we're facing is the stigma of not only addiction, but the fact that they're now in the criminal justice system and they possibly have lost their children, and it just starts to mound on them and suffocate them. And it really, really is an insurmountable task if you don't have support systems in place like Sister was talking about?
I would say, and I certainly would agree with all of those. I would also say that for those who have the least amount of resources and the least amount of supports, those who are poor, those who are homeless, and we have, as a part of our network, over 900 people who are homeless on any given day in the city of Philadelphia that we're reaching out to, is that, again, quite often when we see someone who is poor and someone who has other kinds of barriers, we think that that is a personal problem. We think that there is something that they haven't done right, and this is some kind of punishment for that behavior. And so for me, it's really making sure that we see that everybody who is in the community who is suffering from this disease is all us, is all me, is all a part of our family.
Of course, we know that addiction is a disease. So you're not just fighting willpower, you're fighting your own biochemistry, especially with the opioid crisis. At Project Home, the men and women that that are part of our community, we see many dangerous misperceptions and myths around addiction. And oftentimes, it's bad enough that someone's living on the street and the stigma that comes with homelessness, coupled with addiction and mental illness, it often affects not only their ability to come off the street and their sense of hope and possibility, but it also affects when they do come off the street and they do get the supports that they're choosing in their own recovery path, that it affects employment, it affects housing, and it affects their lives for, for many years to come. So this stigma is such a huge problem. It also not only affects individuals, but also the systemic effect of the stigma of addiction. So the most dramatic example we had was when we wanted to develop units of affordable housing, supportive housing for people who had mental illness and addiction at 1515 Fairmount Avenue. We ran into a terrible NIMBY problem. And so people get stigmatized, again, not only individually, but then when systems and programs are there to help people, those same programs get stigmatized, which is really devastating and a double problem when you're trying to address the devastating effects of this disease and stigma.
Did you hear everything everyone said on the panel? Do you know what I heard? That we set every single person who is struggling with addiction, we set them up to fail. So, we were talking backstage, and I had said that I am not a recovery specialist. I am not an interventionist. I am not a psychologist. I graduated high school. Yet what boggles my mind is I can see it as clear as the hand in front of my face, yet people that seem to have 8 or 9 different degrees have trouble seeing it, and I don't understand that. I don't. And I think that the reason that is because the one thing that we're starting to hit on is people look at addiction, and I did this back. This is what addiction looks like. Do you see that? That's what addiction looks like. Not this. See, this is addiction. But this and all of these contributes to this. Addiction is not a one problem fix all. There are all of these things that go along that create this stigma, that create the addiction itself. And let me tell you something, if you don't know it already, any single person that is in this room right now that has someone that they love struggling with addiction, you can turn around and tell the person next to you that doesn't, every single family member is struggling with addiction as well. If your loved one is struggling with addiction, so are you. Because people forget that the family feels more helpless sometimes than even the one struggling with addiction. Because we can't make the change for someone. So what do? We love them. We support them. People ask me about enabling. I'm not talking about enabling. I'm talking about letting someone know that I love you, I am here for you, I will move a mountain when you want me to move it. But I need you to come to me. Tell me you want to move it, and I'm there. And you fall 1,000 times, pick you up 1,001. You cannot give up hope because they have none. They have none. When they see that hope leave your face, do you understand that someone struggling with addiction actually believes that their family would be better off if they died? Did you hear what I just said to you? My son really believed everyone would be better off if he died. Well, I'm telling you, none of us are better off. So you got to give them that hope. You got to give them that look and let them know that they're not a lost cause. And you do that by talking to people that maybe don't see it that way. Not fighting with them. And understand that people don't know. They're not being mean. They just don't know. To be patient and tolerant with people that maybe don't get it. Don't fight with them. Explain to them to look at it differently. Explain to them to try to understand it a little bit better. Because until the majority of this country looks at addiction as a mental health issue and people that are not a lost cause, none of these laws are going to change. Nothing is going to happen because public opinion in this country literally rules what happens in Washington and every politician decision that they make. You need to change people's minds on the street, and then you'll change the laws. But that's up to you. You guys got to go out there and do it.
Indeed. Thank you so much for that passion, Tony. One of the common misperceptions, sister, is that addiction can be overcome by sheer will alone, that this is just a personal problem. How do you address that misperception in both the people that you're dealing with active opioid use or any substance use disorder, as well as the people that might either be skeptical of that as an actual medical disease?
Right. Changing the stigma is so critically important. And I think one of the most first things, which is what we're doing today, is public education. As we continue to learn more about the science of addiction and the science of recovery, that will help all of us understand more about the stigma and how to address it. Also knowing that there are many paths to addiction, there are many paths to recovery. I think there's also so many things that we can do. Hire people in recovery, house people in recovery, declare a war on drugs, but not a war on drug addicts. Advocate for more just and humane public policies. And I think one of the things that Tony just talked about that we really see every single day is we need to increase a compassionate presence and reduce obstacles as much as possible and distress. And this doesn't mean the absence of negative consequences, but shared decision-making with the person and what needs to be repaired. Often what needs to be repaired is the relationship with oneself, with others, with family and community. And the lack of repair perpetrates isolation, shame, and addiction. We have to be willing to reach out again and again and again to let people know that they're loved and welcomed, just as they are. And even as they aspire to change, and to hold out that hope for someone until they can feel that hope for themselves. That's just so critically important. And to continue to tell stories of recovery and to instill hope. And one of the things that I mentioned earlier was our struggle at 1515 Fairmount Avenue with the NIMBY issue, that they didn't want people in the neighborhood that were mentally ill beginning their recovery and experiencing homelessness. But once we moved into the neighborhood and people got to meet and interact with the Project Home community, we had another opportunity several years later and to develop another 55 units right down the block. And the same people that opposed the development of 1515 supported our next development because they could see in the eyes, the lives, the faces of people with the courage for recovery and the courage to own their own story like Tony. They wanted to support that. So the transformation that recovery brings in the lives of people experiencing addiction, but the courage and the transformation that recovery can bring to our communities and neighborhoods is just phenomenal. And that is the story of hope that we have to continue to tell, to live, to be that compassionate presence that allows for God's grace to do infinitely more than we could ever ask or imagine.
Amen.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the most important parts of what you were just talking about is this call to action, right? It's not something that we can just sit back and wait for.
No.
So what is it that each of you are doing in your respective areas to address this issue of stigma? Maybe we'll start down here.
I have made it very clear to the brand, the Tony Luke's brand, that anyone that comes in, when I say a year in recovery, because the first year is a year that you really develop finding yourself. And like they say on the 12 steps, you shouldn't have a relationship and like these things. But after a year, I tell people, if someone comes in, if I got a kid coming in who's looking to make an extra $100 because they want to go to a concert, or someone coming in that is a year clean in recovery, well, they go to the top of the list because they're trying to put their life back together. So I encourage business. There's a huge company called Restaurateur Food Groups who has a lot of different businesses, and I've sat with Ray, and he is literally putting together a program for people in recovery that they will bring people in. We will train them not just to do a regular job. We're putting together entrepreneurial programs for those who are in recovery that have an entrepreneurial spirit, who want to own their own business, who want to start it. So we show them how to do that. We want to talk to banks and lenders to give second chances or give third chances, whatever, to people to start a company. I don't want people to think that if you're in recovery, the only job you can get is cleaning up or handing out bags. You shouldn't be limited to who you are. We're not limited to what we can do. Why should we limit someone in recovery? So we are definitely doing that all the time. We're looking to get people hired. We're looking to train people in recovery. We have to give them a way to put their life back together again. And speaking about the stigma, I go everywhere I possibly can to let people know we're talking about human beings, not statistics, human beings. So if we can do that, I try to change people's minds about how they look at addiction, and we hire people in recovery. I want them to know that Tony Luke's, which is the only thing I can control right now, and Restelli's is a place that you can go and put in an application, and you write on there, I'm a year in recovery, I'm 2 years in recovery. You're not going to get thrown in the trash.
Well, I heard someone say vote. Can you say that louder? Vote. Voting matters, okay? Being a part of this conversation is certainly about all of us really breaking down the stigma and making sure that we're not only engaged, we're passionately engaged about fighting this problem. And the way that it ultimately bubbles up to policymakers is that we become a part of the voting population. It does matter. And let me give you a couple of examples. And I know Sister Mary is aware of this as well. In our programs where we're helping people find places and roofs over their heads and places for them to come for the night, it used to be If you were an active drug user, you could not come in to our programs. And now we have lower barriers and we have more opportunities to get people in because this is a disease. We wouldn't say to someone who has cancer or diabetes, by the way, you can't come and stay at our shelter. But we were saying that to people who had the disease of addiction or had a drug problem or drug abuse. Whatever you ultimately called it, we needed to bring people in. So now we can bring people in with the support of policymakers who understand this because you vote, because you participate, and because you've made this a real issue. I will also say that very recently, one of our programs was in the local paper talking about the fact that we were looking at people who were coming out of hospitals, the medically fragile, and even though we might have space, we didn't have all the services that we needed at 9 or 10 or 11 o'clock at night. Again, policymakers, elected officials heard that story and just recently granted our programs a grant so that we can hire nurses so that when people come in, we can begin the triage and connection to services right away, whether it is an opioid issue or whether it's diabetes or whether it's cancer. Again, we're now starting to look at all of those diseases, those chronic diseases, the same, and saying, what do we need to do in order to try to do that? So please, if there's nothing else that you remember that I said today, whoever that young person is up there who said vote, thank you very much, because that's what I'm going to be saying every day until November 6th when I walk out of here.
Great.
Tony, I want to thank you because really, I think until you put a face on this, we were dealing with really, as you would say, in regard to the Alcoholics Anonymous. Who was in Stop the Whispers? You know, how'd that person die? I heard this, I heard that. Today in our local newspapers, there was 2 obituaries. Both talked about how the person died, passed away after a long struggle with addiction. I salute the parents that do that and the families that do that, because it has really given reverence to that person's life to say they struggled and they died, and not to have whispers about it. And I think that that's one of the most important things coming that we have seen a huge change in. But it's people like you that have the courage to do it, so thank you. Second part, I think, is a system. As a system, we have to realize the changes that we need to make, just the way a parent's making a change. When we look and say that we recognize that the Los Angeles prison is the largest mental health facility in the United States. When we look at the fact that usually your county prisons end up being the detox centers for people on a daily basis. When you look how many parents call each day and say, please, can you have my son or daughter brought into your court because I can't control them. But yet our laws aren't adequate in Pennsylvania in regard to mandatory treatment. There are many changes that have to be made, whether it be voting or whether it being involved, placing a face on it. It's really a point of saying we are no longer allow this to be that hidden thing under the bushel. We're not talking about people that are living under the bridge. We're not talking about people that are criminals and thieves and ugly things. They may do that as a result of their addiction to feed their addiction, but that's not who they are. And until we start making infrastructure changes, whether it be the health systems, whether it be community organizations, or whether it be the government and courts, we all need to make sure that we are putting our fair share in. And unfortunately, what I've seen over all these years is that we're in silos. Sister was doing what she was doing, what she was doing, the government doing what they were doing, and we weren't working together. The one thing I have seen is hope that now we have people working together, but it's just too little and it's too late. We really need to come up to the plate.
That's excellent. Thank you, Judge. Thank you. Sharmain, one key aspect of what you were just talking about, Judge, is that this disease doesn't discriminate, right? It reaches across all communities, across all boundaries. Unfortunately, those people with this disease are discriminated against. So how can we help people understand and see that this is all of our problem, that this affects every single community?
Well, a couple of things, I think, and I think it just absolutely was clear from the meeting today. And I do want to congratulate the Independence Blue Cross family and foundation for really doing this. I mean, This, a lot of times what happens, right? We might have had an hour of this conversation and everybody would have clapped and we would have gone home and we would have gone on and worked on something else. I came early this morning because I wanted to learn more. It wasn't just enough for me to know the experiences that I had, but I wanted to learn more. So what I learned today that I'd like to share, shared language, new language for this. I walked away with the idea that this condition is called substance abuse disorder. It's called substance abuse disorder. Let's make sure that we have that language, that it is a chronic disease, not an acute disease. A chronic disease means we're going to have to treat it over time. It's not that you go in, as Tony said, for 30 days, and then, you're all done. It is a chronic disease. It takes more intervention and more support than some acute diseases might. And it is not a personal failing.
Yes.
It is not a personal failing. The other thing I would say is understand the science. The other thing I was so excited about today is that we got a chance to really get a chance of understanding the science. What's happening in the brain? Why do we react certain ways once an addictive substance like heroin or fentanyl or others get into our system? So really understanding the science behind it and making sure that we can at least refer people to that information. Again, understanding that there is not yet a cure. There is not yet a cure. But it doesn't mean that we don't find ways to continue to find the best possible treatments that allow people to live the fullest life. My husband has diabetes, and he has fought every single day to live a good life, take his medication. There is no cure, but no one looks at him and says, oh my God, what did he do wrong? My husband works out, he eats better than I do, and he has a chronic disease that doesn't have a cure. Like most diseases, those who are affected are all of us, white, black, brown, male, female, rich, and yes, poor. When we see those who are poor and black and brown, remember that they are us, that we are them, that we're all in the same family, and that when the problem too often starts in poor communities, we cannot allow it to grow there and then ultimately reach the rest of society before we intervene. So let's be all together in this fight. Let's be all together in this fight.
Sharmain, thank you.
Thank you.
That's excellent. Judge, one of the important pieces when we think about all of us in this fight is that some of us have been incarcerated, some of us had been involved with the criminal justice system in some way, shape, or form. I know that you touched a little bit on it before, but the work that you're doing is really helping us to rethink that approach and rethink the way that we address this issue in conjunction with the criminal justice system. Can you talk to me a little bit about how it is that we can really work with that criminal justice system to reduce those barriers to people who are entering into recovery, are entering back into healthy, happy, productive lives?
Well, the reality is that over 80% of the people that are in the criminal justice system, people that are in our prisons, the people that are on supervision, are there because of drugs and alcohol or mental health. And that's a low figure. If we don't start facing what the elephant in the middle of the room is, and not look at, okay, what was their offense? What did they do this time? What did they do in the past? But rather look at the elephant in the middle of the room and say, what do we need to address the underlying issues and problems that are here? You're never going to make a change in the criminal justice system. And the reality is that we have to make sure that we are working with treatment and that it's not the court that's going to dictate what the treatment is, but it's going to be best practices and the professionals that are doing it We have to also watch out that there is a number of, quite frankly, a number of pill factories that are out there, a number of places that aren't doing best practices in regard to treatment. We have to make sure that that's being followed. So really what the court should be doing, in my estimate, is that it looks to see what best practice is. It looks to see what that problem is in the middle and say, what do we need to do to address that issue, that problem that the person has? That may be, the addiction is one problem. But second of all, what are we doing about the housing? What are we doing about the jobs? What are we doing about transportation? Here we have a system that's built up that when a person is arrested, we are taking their license away from them. I mean, it's so draconian, it's so counterproductive to getting a changed behavior. And that's really, when you think about it, the object of the criminal justice system is not simply to punish. It's about changed behavior. It's about reducing recidivism. If we don't address the underlying problem, we're never going to change that behavior. So we need to work better with treatment. We have to make sure that there's other collateral support systems in place and that we don't look at our systems as being an isolated island that we're taking all these bad people on and we're going to take care of, rather than realizing that we are integrated in that society, in the town where they're at, and they're going to return to that town. And so what are we going to do to make sure that person has the support they need, has the care that they need, and to make sure that there's also accountability from the courts in regard to it. So it's a structural and infrastructure change that, unfortunately somebody mentioned earlier, I forget who the speaker was, about how for science it takes 7 years or whatever for change to be made. Well, if that's science, you don't know what the government's like. It takes a hell of a lot longer than that. And also you have two competing interests here, don't forget. You have victims, and you have society that say, wait a second, this person stole, they hurt somebody, they may have killed somebody. And the other side, you say, yes, but they are going to come out of prison, or they may not even need to go into prison. If they were doing scripts, or if they were doing really something that had to do with their addiction, then why aren't we addressing that rather than just looking at the mandatory sentence part? So the mandatory sentence really should be part of what is the mandatory treatment going to be, and that's what the mandatory jail time is going to be. Those, I believe, changes that need to be made.
Excellent. Thank you, Judge. Tony, much of what you're doing is advocating for those who can't perhaps speak for themselves, right? Much of like what Judge was saying, that we need to think about this from a systemic perspective. How is it that you hope to change the systems around us, given the voice that you have and the work that you've been doing in schools and in our communities?
Well, I think that a lot of the early problems, we have to realize that my generation was so much different than the generation we have now. If you were bullied in school when I was a kid, you were bullied in front of 20 people. Now, if you're bullied in front of 1,000 people. So believe me, I do feel that this generation is hit with more information at one time than we were ever exposed to. I also believe that we need to be in schools. We need to speak in schools and let people know that people are judging their self-worth by what people are saying about them that don't even know them. This is how kids are being raised today. They're being raised by parents who are not parents. These are people on social media. When you could come to me and tell me that a child has either thought about or, God forbid, committed suicide because someone that they didn't even know on social media said that they were ugly or overweight or stupid, there's a huge problem here. None of these kids know their self-worth. They don't. Either kids are told that they're the greatest person in the world and that no one is like them, and then when you go in the real world, everything is going to be beautiful or roses, or they're told that they're no good. Where are the role models today? Where is it? And how many parents, including myself, and I never say anything that I don't include myself in, I can't count how many times I told my kids, I'm tired, I'm busy, go on the internet. Don't you have PlayStation? We do that. And let me tell you something, I don't care if you're a neurosurgeon. No job is more important than your child. No job. So we need to put that time in. We need to educate kids on coping skills. Do you know that there is, when I heard this, I couldn't believe that there's something now called adulting schools where they're literally teaching college kids who've graduated with degrees how to make a shopping list. I can't make this up. So it's like we've eliminated common sense. We don't even know how to speak to each other because all we do is text to each other. We don't even have a conversation or pick up a phone and speak. These are things that we do have to look at. Technology is amazing, but when technology becomes the way of life, when technology takes the place of human contact and human emotion, there has to be some type of balance. And we need to speak about that in schools. We need people interacting with each other because these things just don't happen. No one, it's an old saying, but it's true. No one wakes up and says, you know what I think I want to be when I grow up? I want to be an addict. That's what I want to be. No one says that. And let me tell you something, just do me a favor, okay? Because I know most of us are prone to it. Try stop using the word junkie. Because to me, it is the most offensive, most vile word that you can say to someone. You know, and I hear it all the time. I hear people of my generation all the time. Well, this junkie, that junkie. And I cringe. I literally cringe. But I don't scream at them because it goes back to what I said. I try to educate them and say, I just want you to know that I understand why you're using the word because you're so used to using it. But I got to tell you, it's really offensive to someone who has a loved one struggling with addiction. And it's really offensive to someone who is struggling with addiction. So try not to use the word. Try not to, that's the stigma that we keep perpetuating. The stigma over and over again. And when you drive down the street and you see someone nodding, or you see some beautiful soul of a human being get into a car with some stranger, don't look at them and go, ugh. Know that that's someone's child, someone's mom. Have a little compassion to understand that they didn't choose to be there. Look at them just a little bit differently. Encourage your friends to do the same. We don't look at someone, if we see someone walking down the street with a bandana over their head and they don't have any hair, we don't laugh and go, hey, boy. We go, oh my God, that person, they might have cancer. Right? We show compassion. We don't show it to those people that are struggling with addiction, and we really need to. Change really does start within, and it has to start within.
Thank you.
Tony, if I could, on that, when you talk about a person, early not wanting to be an addict, and that's a great day. I always say to people in the court and to parents that come to me struggling with their children, it's very rare that a person's going to wake up in the morning and say, oh my God, it's a great day to go into a treatment center. It doesn't happen, and that's one of the things that I think we have to really, when you talk about stigma, say we need to encourage people. It's a win-win. You just got into treatment. Congratulations. Rather than saying, oh, I heard they went to treatment. And I think we have to start changing that stigma of when people are going to have the courage to go get help and that families are supporting it rather than don't tell anybody in the family. Don't let anyone know that Tony went to treatment because, we're not that type of family. The reality is it should be, we are that type of family. We're supporting everyone going to treatment, and we want them to go to treatment. So I think that's as much a part of it that's difficult in regard to stigma.
Absolutely.
Would you ever think about telling someone suffering from a disease, and whatever it is, and I use cancer because it's a horrific disease, would you ever tell someone suffering from cancer that came to you and said, you know what, I'm in remission? Would you ever look at them and go, well, the chances are cancer's going to come back? Would you say that? But we do that with people struggling with addiction all the time. I'm 18 months in recovery. Well, you got a real good shot of relapsing. That's the reality of it. We do that. But we wouldn't do it on the other hand. So, Those are things to think about, really.
Thank you. I want to make sure that we have a little bit of time for some audience questions. So if you want to take the time, write down your questions, pass them down to either the left-hand side or the right-hand side of the auditorium. And in this last couple of minutes, what are your final thoughts? I know, Tony, you've talked a lot about the things that we can already be doing, but for the rest of us, what is it? What's one thing that we can walk away from today in our personal lives to address stigma as soon as we walk out these doors?
Okay. So the vision of Project Home is none of us are home until all of us are home. And Father Greg Boyle once said that unless we accept our own wounds, we'll be prone to despise the wounded. And the struggle of addiction and just struggle, there's struggle in all of our lives. And as we come to accept our own woundedness, it will be a lot easier to be that compassionate presence for others. And the only other thing I just wanted to say too, and that's in response to the judge, is, of course, I agree, wholeheartedly with everything you said. And I just wanted to add an is that there are many paths to recovery, many best practices and all that's awesome. And we have to be attuned to listening to the person who will chart their own path to recovery. And it may be somewhat different than the path we may choose. And it's all okay. So that the personal path of recovery is really important as well.
Right. I just wanted to add, and I know we'll have time for some questions, but for me, it's really about keeping the conversation going after today. Mm-hmm. And some people will say, well, I'm not quite sure how to do that or how we should get started. I don't know how many of you have heard about a project here in Philadelphia called On the Table. On November 8th in the city of Philadelphia, sponsored by the Philadelphia Foundation, the Knight Foundation, and others, you can register and establish an on-the-table conversation. You can invite 10 people from your neighborhood, your family, your community, to the place of your choice, your office, your home, or whatever, and you could make this your topic. You can make this your conversation, and then it gets to be shared if you want it to. It can be private, or it can be shared across the thousands of people who are going to be a part of this conversation on November the 8th. So you have a chance to really get engaged and involved in continuing the conversation and continuing the work after today. So if you go online and look for On the Table Philadelphia, this kind of work is being done around the country. And the idea is to bring people together who maybe sometimes don't all look the same, don't always get a chance to have a conversation. But as I'm sure Tony Luke would say, life is always better over a good sandwich or something. And it gives us a chance to really engage in, I would say, continuing to learn from each other and continuing to develop the empathy and caring and support that we all need to stick together, because this is going to be a long fight, and we can't wake up and see this off of the headlines tomorrow or next week or next year.
Thank you.
I think, as was mentioned before, I don't think we should allow any person that has died because of an overdose or anyone that's suffered, has been imprisoned or has lost their children, to let those lives go in vain. And so as we leave here today, we have to be careful that we don't be part of the whisper campaign and the stigma, but rather we look at those individuals as our family to say, what can we do to encourage and help people move forward? And if we don't do that, we're forever going to be in this problem.
Absolutely. And exactly. And one way to do so is visit www.shareyouropioidstory.com. You can view the stories of the others who have shared their story, many of whom are in the audience today. You can also share your story.